I moved to New York for the second time in 1982. And when I was in art school, I was always in love with sculpture. So coming from living in Vermont, sculpture was architecture in New York. And then as an artist, I read about the 1% for Art program that I think began in 1985. For the very first time, artists could envision public artworks that weren't bronze immovable sculptures or mosaic murals for public art in public spaces. They could work with architects on a team and use fiber optics and lenticular lenses and make things move and reflect and refract and do all kinds of things. And the budgets were $500,000 or more. So I thought, well, this would be a wonderful opportunity for artists to work with new technologies of our time instead of traditional. I founded the organization in '88, but I believe 1985 or '86 is when the Percent for Art program began in our country, which means 1% of every city, state, and federal building that's built has to go to art. Usually it's put in an atrium or down in the subways or of these buildings to create more of an amenity for our public space, to humanize these buildings. So anyway, I lived on Staten Island, which has the two most ugly public buildings in all of our city. They're virtually holding tanks where the doors open and the people are like filling the space and they're like cattle and they just go out. There are no windows. The beauty of the outdoors, you can't see the beautiful New York Harbor and the ocean view. So, well, now this was back also in 1988, so I think it may be different now. But anyway, I sat in the ferry terminal building one day and I said to myself, if I was totally unencumbered by a budget and I could have an engineer, an architect work with me, what would I do in this space to bring the beauty of the outdoors in? So I was trained as a printmaker, and I envisioned these large, triangular shaped frosted glass prisms that would stand up between the vertical support beams, and then on the two downward slanting sides, I would etch the water world of the birds going down in the wake of the ferry boat and the sunset, setting over New Jersey and those big kind of structures, cranes. Anyway, so I envisioned this public art project, and one day sitting on the ferry outdoors, I didn't know what the technology would be for it, to bring it alive. And I was sitting next to a man who was reading an issue of Popular Science magazine, and he had it open to a page that it was about piping sunlight through fiber optics from the top of a skyscraper in Tokyo. I think it was Tokyo, it was a major Japanese city, into the basement where they were growing orchids. So piping sunlight. So I thought, okay, this is a holding tank. What I want to do is, so they talked about this Himawari device that is in the shape of a sunflower, and it has all of these lenticular lenses that focus the light onto the tips of a fiber optic cable. And the fiber optics could then bring the sunlight into both ends of these vertical etched glass shapes. And then the surface of the water would twinkle and the lights, it would change colors and blah, 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 blah. So I envisioned this and then the other thing is I got off the ferry, I went to the magazine stand, I got the magazine, and so there was another article about the fiber optics, one about the Himawari device. So all of a sudden there was the technology. So I envisioned this project, and I began sharing it with the city government, and then I thought, what happened was there was no money in the budget for this project, even though the Himawari device was donated by the company in Japan, the fiber optics were donated. I learned that public Department of Transportation, perhaps especially, you go into the pipeline 7 years later, you might have a project. So I thought, well, I had formed a nonprofit because I thought to find other artists like myself that wanted to collaborate with engineers and use new technology in public spaces, I just thought that I needed sort of like, it would be a needle in the haystack to try to find artists, but if there was this beacon, this one piece that all of a sudden used new technology, then the artists would come towards the organization. I wouldn't have that problem finding people. Well, when the project didn't go forward, I asked myself whether I wanted to disband the nonprofit I had started or do something else. So I put a little blurb in the New York Foundation for the Arts newsletter, which goes out, back then they went out to 55,000 artists in New York City. About 22 artists came to the ferry terminal building on a blistery winter evening, and I showed them the maquette that I had done, and I asked them if they were interested in working with engineers and making public art that used new technologies. And none of them said yes. And I said, well, why did you come here today? And they said, well, I make hybrid video sculpture. I make LED paintings. All of them were making this kind of hybrid art that used some traditional means and then new technologies, whether video or kinetic, something that kind of animated the work, brought it alive. And I was flabbergasted. I was aware of George Rhodes's piece in the 42nd Street bus station called the Ballroom piece. And it has all these balls that go down and they fall onto something that then spins it around and it makes sounds. And that's when I fell in love with kinetic art. I saw all these people standing around, grandfathers, children, people of all ethnic groups, and their noses were up against this plexiglass looking mesmerized by this piece of art, this audio kinetic sculpture. So I knew about that work, but then these artists brought all of this new work to me. And they were complaining that the New York art world wouldn't even look at their work. They didn't have galleries that had enough plug-ins to be able to plug in what they wanted to do with electricity. So they were saying, and they weren't aware of all of one another. They'd never met one another before. So all of a sudden I saw there was a need to create a community. And really that's how ASCII began. The purpose then became to promote their work and to really give them a sense of community, and through our monthly bulletin, give them information that comes into my desk from all over the world every month about the news, opportunities, exhibitions, jobs, festivals. So I don't go out and represent artists and help them get gallery work. I think that's a part of every artist's job, to do the marketing or pay someone to do marketing. But I'm all about giving the information to professionally grow people. And then create platforms like we did in 1988 through 2002. We did perhaps the first art and technology international seminars. 2 of them at Cooper Union in the Great Hall, and then at CUNY Graduate Center in New York City. And there was a gradual shift then from art and technology as the thing to then by the end, 2002, to more about art and science. And to me, it's always been the message, not how you say it, but what you're saying. And of course, now new media can bring narratives and artistic messages about science or whatever alive in new ways. So those were the early beginnings of ASCII. We did these symposia. I curated 2 kinetic art exhibitions. One was very large in the Great Hall at the New York Hall of Science in 1994. And then a couple of years late, 1998, I did an exhibition on interactive light art, 3 large installations in the Great Hall. And we've been doing, for the past 16 years, science-inspired 2-dimensional image artworks at the New York Hall of Science. And as well as early on, these exhibitions were in some New York galleries. So we've done a lot of different things, and I would say that probably because I'm sort of the driving force of ASCII, my personal taste changing from artists just creating new applications of technology just didn't interest me anymore. To me, it's, what do you want to say, and then selecting the technology that can bring the message forward. There's this huge gamut. Mm-hmm. There are artists that just paint pretty pictures, and there are artists that are, like yourself, exploring areas of science, whether it's sensorial sensations or scientific phenomena of gravity and magnetism, or is it issues of neuroscience. These are the artists that I have surrounded my adult life with. Artists that are, they're really, I think these artists are more about asking questions rather than finding the answers. And I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but I've always felt that science is more about the discovery process to find answers. And I think the beauty of art is that it can be provocative, metaphoric, poetic. It can use juxtaposition. It can use all kinds of visual tropes, whether surrealism, pointillism, whatever, to express. Art, to me, is an expressive medium, whereas a scientist is trained to hold back personal expression. That it's a field that is to be very not subjective, but objective. So there, to me, is where there's a big difference, and that's good, because that's fine. It does mean in curating shows, and for these artists that are involved with science, when they try to go to the art museum world, there's often a huge disconnect. The art museum world is controlled by people who majored in art history primarily. When I told this to a scientist, most art historians never took an art class in their life. They've never painted. They've never done any hands-on art. This person was flabbergasted because of what it might mean in terms of having a more full understanding and appreciation of art. But in any case, that's the art world and Christie's and auction houses and the gallery world. That's a very complex industry, and I call it an industry because it really is. Science, it has its own complexity that the man on the street doesn't really understand. And funding, scientists don't get to just discover what they want to discover. It's all about where's the funding, following the trail for grants. And for artists, very much, the dominant art world decides whether this work that they've been doing, and it's been collected and it's been supporting a lifestyle that now they can support themselves from the art. Do they switch because of their intellectual curiosity? Or do they continue making large bronze trees, or whatever, you know what I mean? Because this is what's hot right now. It's not a simple, it's a very complex question. But I do believe the curiosity quotient is so similar, and the processes that artists use, the trial and error, the experimentation, It's all there. Exactly. I think the purpose and the mission is different. And I mean, I was trained, my guiding professor in art school was someone who believed that art was about expressing ideas. Now that's not the case for all people, but that's why I feel the way I do about art being an expressive tool. So there are differences, and I think they can be very complementary to one another, but I think they will always remain very different too. Well, visualization tools, of course, are all digital, yeah? But the scientists have the most powerful digital tools, digital visualization tools. Most artists would absolutely love to get their hands on them, but they don't have access. I think most of them are astoundingly beautiful, you know, even if it's the micro world of insects, you know. However, in terms of communicating an idea beyond beauty, that is what's important to me. So that is where an artist can, use the juxtaposition of images and metaphor to create more of a questioning in the minds of viewers. I'm not sure beauty alone can go much more than the surface, and then it's almost like what kinetic art was criticized for. There's a wow factor, and then what? Where's the narrative? Where's the dialogue? How does it provoke the viewer to go deeper in their own mind? So yes, just like a beautiful landscape painting, those images are art. It doesn't happen to be the kind of more narrative or provocative art that I think the art gallery is always looking for, because art critics and writers are looking to create a narrative, to have something to write about, and so if there's a many-layered meaning, many layers to go through and to delve into, I think that sort of stands more of a test of time. This is something that I'm actually working on right now. For the last 10 years, since my first snorkeling experience in the Keys, and discovering that 2/3 of our ocean reefs are dead or endangered around the world, and then becoming an ocean conservation activist, I've been developing a project that is an art science exhibition project about the health of our ocean, and how, because every second breath that we take is from the ocean, all of our fresh water comes from the ocean, and our climactic systems are driven by an ocean that's healthy and in balance. So what I've been following is that the scientists, and they started 10 years ago with their baseline reporting of the ocean reefs bleaching and the collapsing fisheries, and ocean acidification is actually quite a new ocean health threat. But so the scientists have built up this body of knowledge about ocean health threats. But what they're not doing, a couple of them are, they're not taught to do this, so I don't fault them. They don't know how to relate that information to the man on the street. Why is it important for the man walking downstairs, going by on the street? Why it's important is because we are part of this intricate, interdependent biosphere that needs to be in balance if it wants to support life. If we want it to support us and our children, we have to have the biodiversity on the planet in order to do that. We can't have our global ocean become a dead sea. The ocean issues all happen out of sight. And this is where artists they excel, bringing ideas that you cannot see with the naked eye and conceptualizing them in a way that can reach not only the heart but the mind, not by pointing fingers. You know, the Anthropocene is a very big issue right now, but I don't believe in doing that, because none of us our age, I don't know if the young woman at the camera did, most of us didn't take ecology in school. We didn't know how we're just a part of this system, and that we can't play God. We cannot, take all of our natural resources away and pollute them and still expect this biosphere to support life. So this project is our current project that I know the artists that I've looked at over the past 6 months from around the world, they've made this their passion project. And I think that whether it's a scientist or an artist, it has to be your passion project for really good communication to come forward. I think that is the basis, whether you call it art sci or science or art. They don't know how to bring man in not in a way of just factoids or in pointing fingers, but in a way of stimulating the imagination of the public and provoking them to ask questions about, why is this happening? That's what happened. That's what happened to me when I went down and snorkeled. I got out of the water, and he said this about the endangered and dead reefs, and I said, I was angry. I thought, what do you mean all that beauty that I just saw is going to be gone in 20 years? I was outraged. So I think you have to somehow provoke a questioning inside everyone. What do you mean these are the facts? Because if this is the case, well, what it means for me is I've got to get involved somehow. I've got to look at my own talents and ask myself, what can I do? Whether I'm a magazine editor or an artist or a football player with lots of money that they could send off to an ocean conservation organization. We can all do something, and there's lots of big issues today, and we all have to get involved in them. This ocean issue isn't a scientific issue. Finally, the science community understands it's a human issue, and artists are the supreme ones that can activate this role that they do so well. And Mother Nature is taking it directly to the public with climate change. So actually, this is something that no one can ignore, and it's in our face now. Well, Leonardo, which is a journal, but was started by Roger Molina out on the West Coast, almost the same, he and his dad and a publisher, Maxwell in the UK, started it in Paris many, many years ago. So for the longest time it was ISAT, International Society for Art and Science and Technology, and their journal, Leonardo, is published by MIT Press. And then there was ASCII on the East Coast. The West Coast, Roger Molina is an astrophysicist, and so he's leading it, and it really does come through the academic areas, and they've been very, very effective at now getting art science curriculum in the university level. You can get degrees in art and environment, art and neuroscience. This is just happening in the last 5 years. So they've been incredibly effective. I came out of an art background, and I lived in New York all my adult life. So I have not been as effective in getting it into the art world. But what's wonderful is that there are small art science organizations, even if it's a team called a collaborative, happening all over the world, all over the world. Maybe it's not so much in Asia yet, because their art world is sort of just modernizing, I would say. And that's really heartening. They might look to the ASCII website, but I think because a lot of young people that have just gotten master's degrees or just going into university, they came out of a digital multimedia world, and that's so inside and ingrained in them. They have been putting together, presentations ever since they were kids and playing video games, whatever. So when they go into science, often, they've been told they have to make a choice. And they're saying, no, I'm not. I'm going to do science in a very creative, visually creative way. I'm going to use those tools. Or I'm going to do experiments that they might be bench-like science experiments, but holy moly, look what this did, and I'm going to enter it in an art competition. So it's really exciting and very heartening that it's happening independently and in all cities of the world. I think that ever since the Industrial Revolution, science has moved into areas of speciality. That's been both good and bad. We need all that deep questioning, deep research in order to move forward and to find out and to solve some of the pressing problems of today. However, we need the Renaissance man back and woman. And I see this is happening. And that's why there are more young people getting involved so quickly in art science and doing it on their own. We have to bring the big picture into the narrow focus of scientific research. It has to be, how does it serve humanity? How does it relate to me? Because I think it's very easy. It's even easy for an artist to just go into the studio and never talk to anybody about their work, and then they become asocial. I mean, there are stereotypes about artists and scientists which mostly don't work. But we have to make what we do, we have to make a contribution. And I know that artists and scientists, most of them believe that just by doing their work, they're making a wonderful contribution to society. And not that we should gear our work to the audience. I don't believe in that. But we are human. So it's not difficult for an artist to look inside and say, why am I reacting to that scientific information so strongly? What is it that's pulling me? Is it the myths of our society, or it's the ethical questions involved? What's going on inside of me that's reacting so strongly? So, and if the artist or if the scientist does do this looking inside, then they're sort of reaching people. They're reaching the general public, because they are, after all, human too. But unfortunately, the scientist has not been allowed to do this. I think that will keep growing. Just as science, about 15 years ago, started doing astrophysics, astrogeological physics. I mean, there are all these hybrid forms of science. So, and of course, in the science, in the arts, we have this with our types of media that are being created. And now there's this commingling of the field. But I think you're right. I think, scientists, they have also stayed in the lab, like the artists in the studio. So, but now there is this collaboration. But not all not all of them are suited for collaboration, just in their makeup. Do you know what I mean? In their human makeup. So, you know, thank goodness there will be that diversity always. And that's good. Back to the ocean project. You know, if you're dealing with concepts and ideas and phenomena that are unseen to the human eye, well then we have to find creative ways of conceptualizing and kind of being able to translate to people, you know, in ways that can bring it alive. And I think, yeah, I think that artists don't have the ability oftentimes to use all of these sophisticated tools. They're not in their toolbox in the studio. But more and more, I hope that NSF will bring artists into their grants. I mean, they do have a requirement that all National Science Foundation grants public outreach component, have a public outreach component. And for instance, this year I was able to suggest one of our members to be a part of a nanotechnology National Science Foundation grant. And he is excellent in using 3D visual technology to, actually he's one of those, he was a scientist. His master's degree, or was he working on his PhD? No, his master's or PhD was in relativity, and he was working with a very well-known team in Germany. But when he came back to the United States and he married a woman whose father was in science, for some reason he went back to his original love, which was, as a child, always drawing and painting. But now he's doing art science. And he is working with scientists to bring these unseen micro worlds alive in sculpture as well as in 3D imaging. Yeah, it's going to happen. It's just like, it's slow, but it's actually coming faster than I thought now. It is the digital technology, I have to admit. When you're speaking the same language, and that's what digital tools, visualization tools have created, a shared language. And now they can talk. They can share. They can be equally respectful of one another's work because at least they're understanding what goes into it. Mm-hmm. And that, for any collaboration, you have to have that mutual respect to work. So now the next move is to help the scientific community appreciate metaphor and poetry and sort of the more sublime but provocative ways of explaining science.